out the thingamahoosit as soon as it's ready. There we go, Stream Manager. Go to that, edit, and share.
Just going through my references now, Alex. What references do you have?
I have one.
That's alright, because
that's...
we're going to be talking about plenty of different other topics that aren't necessarily going to test your knowledge on the subject.
Okay, I mean, I meant video game references.
I'm like, Sam is the kid that's done like the extra credit homework, and I've just got like one side of A4 with, just doodles on it.
Okay. So, I mean, we'll do it in a second. I've just now posted out, but I mean, I guess we should probably address the elephant in the room. So the main point of this podcast is actually more to talk about how they're used in games and more seen in fiction, like how people use them for storytelling, either just using their names or using some of their powers rather than the entire legend. Because we're not really talking about them for the sake of revisionism. We're actually more talking about them in the sake of what makes them, what coincides with the concept of them, and then going forward with exactly what we want to do with that subject. So we'll do that. I mean, it's kind of interesting because we can also talk about a few other bits and pieces to do with complexes, like for instance, like people say God complex, but we'll get into that in a second.
Are we streaming live now, or is it?
Yeah, we're streaming live now. I'm just just running down the clock just before we actually do something, because I just want to make sure that everything's set up.
The curtain has risen. The curtain has risen, Sam. We perform.
The curtain has risen, and I have yet to rehearse my script. Hey guys. All right.
Show must go on.
So I guess we can start from here. So welcome to the Betarians podcast. I am Joe. I said that so robotically. Hang on a second. We'll start again. Welcome to the Betarians podcast with your host, Joe. I am joined and accompanied with my friends and Patreons, Sam.
Hello, and well met.
And Alex.
Hi, guys. What's so wacky on this podcast?
Welcome, as we are joined into the second week of January. Is it the second week of January?
I think it's the third.
What is time?
It's the 11th, so it's still the second. Yeah, okay, so it's the second.
God, it feels so long.
It is. It's weird how that meme way back in like June that said that 2020 would end by having it that it's like it gets to midnight of December the 30th or the 31st or something, and then it goes over to the next day, and it's actually the 13th month of 2020. And in all honesty, that's what it feels like, because it's more of the same. If most people are listening to this, we are currently dealing with a global pandemic. I don't know where you've been, but if you're here, you probably have crawled from under a rock, or you are still under it. So welcome to the Under a Rock podcast with your host, Geologist Joe.
Do you think they came here for escapism, not to hear the horrific truth of the world we live in?
I mean, I called myself Geologist Joe. You don't get that much more escapology than that. I'm the furthest thing from a geologist.
Mm.
So, this week we're talking about gods, guys.
Oh boy.
Whoop
Oh
whoop.
boy.
Ooh, so it's been. I think it's been a long time coming that we actually talked about the subject, because okay, so the concept of a god, obviously, if people don't know, I don't know how, but I guess we'll get into it, is just literally a being that is a creator of either all things, or a large creator, or the progenitor of many things. In many different pantheons, you have all sorts of gods being powerful beings of downright almighty power. But the greatest question really is not really anything really too deep in this really conversation. I think a while back when I was talking about this, I said, if we did this, I wanted to actually do it more about the pantheons and exactly what makes them interesting and when they are interesting in a story, rather than actually just talking about them, because otherwise we'll then just be more going into theology and history, and to be honest, revisionism is kind of a bit boring. In my opinion, anyway. I know Sam is basically frothing at the mouth.
So much to tell.
But
so many stories. So much classical artwork to mention.
So much classical things that gone. But I guess I will start this off by saying gods and demigods, pantheons in games. Greek and Norse, really. Why so basic? Every single thing does Norse and Greek mythology all the time, and I mean, to be fair, they are now, thanks to a lot of media, the most popular and the most socially known, but in all honesty, they are kind of the most basic ones. I mean, don't get me wrong, Greek and Norse mythology are probably some of the best ones in the terms of the amount of different things and the amount of stories that come from it. But yeah, I mean, we very rarely hear from other pantheons, like the sort of like the Japanese pantheons, because there's a ton of gods. I think their mythology is just as jam-packed with different gods and demigods as Norse and Greek. Like, I mean, obviously Celtic. There's also the Celtic pantheon, and obviously you've got Judeo-Christian, and I think you've also got a couple of other ones that actually have quite a few, like Is it
the Egyptians?
Yeah, Egyptians, and as well as is it not Sanskrit?
Is it Sumerian?
Yes, and
Babylonian
and Hindi, I believe.
Oh yeah, actually, yeah, Hindu gods are pretty cool. I mean,
Yeah,
it's because like in Western, schools weren't really like, in terms of like religious education and history education, we're kind of lacking. We're just like, we focus on the big two, Norse and Greek, and maybe a bit of an Egypt. But like, I actually did get to know a bit of religious education of Hindu religions, and yeah, their pantheons are amazing. They're just like this. Well, I mean, I'm just a sucker for elephant gods, really, and yeah, it's just like just richer. I can see if I can remember like from year 6. Like,
I think you struck it on the head though, because like we're not really obviously all that well taught about it, and in all honesty, if you guys are interested in having a look at it, definitely look up some of the things that we've just said, because honestly, there are many different ways. If you're a storyteller or a writer or a game developer and you're trying to look for something, definitely look into sort of pantheons, because there's a level of familiarity that at least someone in the world will at least have with it, no matter how obscure the reference is. And even if you can just teach someone, even just something, even a name, not necessarily the entire legend behind it, but even just their name, then at least you have something. I'm just trying to alter the audio a bit, because I might be coming out a bit quiet, or I might be coming out too loud. I have no idea. But yeah, I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about is obviously in games like God of War, and obviously in stories like the Marvel Universe, in both the cinematic, the comic book, and now the video games, you see a few different ways that they tell the different gods, like Norse mythology, like for instance, Thor, Loki, Odin, and so on and so forth. And then you've then got in DC where they talk more about Greek mythology, for instance, Wonder Woman and Zeus, Ares, Hephaestus, so on and so forth. And they use them quite well, but really what we're talking about now is really how they're used in games, or at least specifically their mechanics. Yes, that is correct, people. We're not only talking about how the gods are made in games, we're going to break them down mechanically. That's right. You're in the nerdiest space of all time. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, I guess we can actually now talk about them in general. I guess the difference between gods and people who actually just have very much a lot of power are usually they're either the creator of it, or at least they have powers that come from some form of the creation or the beginning of something, or it is something so primordial as to literally like the beginning. I mean, for instance, a god can't usually be considered a god unless if they've created something. But in certain other universes, like for instance, the god of partying or the god of destructions, they're not necessarily the ones who created it, but they're the ones who enforce it or actually have powers over it. So I mean, really, I guess going to it, like the game that has the most amount of it is Smite. They have many different gods in Smite, demigods and gods, and also just creatures that are considered beings of etc. And then you have also got like, just the specific deities of something. But I wanted to ask you two. So, if you had to pick a god that either hasn't been very well used or has been used, but you think that there could be a better way of using them in a game, what game, if there exists one already, that they could be placed in, or if just a new one entirely, how they could work mechanically? Now, Sam, I know that you've been wanting to go about this, so I'm going to say you can start. Like, what kind of god?
I mean, I was immediately going to change your definition, but I will think of a god now that could be put in a game.
Well, I mean,
So
no.
not
I mean,
actually.
for a discussion, I mean, go on. Like, what's your definition then? Or at least specifically, where did you get the definition? I looked up the definition yesterday, and it's like on all father and all creator.
Mostly, it's essentially a game progenitor, but not necessarily creators.
Yeah.
Essentially, just a line of succession that follows in, and they all have usually their own separate domain with which they rule in. You gradually getting smaller and smaller as they go down the lineage, as we saw in both the Greeks and, from what I remember, the Egyptians. And I'm pretty sure the.
Oh yeah, the Norse have. Like, I mean, like, you have the All-Father, the god of thunder. And even in his same line of succession, you have then, I think Balder, who I can't remember what he's the god of.
Oh, he's god of light.
And then also,
I mean, yeah, and he was immortal.
You then have Loki, who, is just the god of mischief. Like, the difference between the god of mischief and the god of thunder could be based on the physical versus the metaphysical. Potentially, mischief can actually have more abilities than you think, but we think, well, thunder is physical. We know what thunder is and looks like in the world.
I wasn't so much meaning that, like, a good example would be, okay, let's say this. Well, there's Nyx, who is a primordial, who is the goddess of all darkness. And then when you go much further in, then you have a being like Macaria, who is, I believe, the daughter of Hades, her domain is the goddess of the good death.
Right.
They get more and more specialized, I should rephrase, as they go down the list usually. But yes, okay. Speaking of Macaria, I would probably put her in a game, because that would be quite interesting. Like, there's a game I saw. It was like Grim Reaper, or it was like a platforming game, like a pseudo RPG platforming game.
Oh right.
Where essentially you kind of go between the living world and the world of the dead, collecting souls, so you can complete a task to continue on to the next stage.
Oh, okay. Kind of like similar to sort of like Mario or, Crash Bandicoot or something, but it's actually more to do with like, I guess you could say like either multi-dimensions or similar to like the difference between the land of the living, like the river Styx and the mortal world.
Somewhat, but maybe like rather than that, maybe try and lead them towards like maybe changing it so that instead of dying in a horrible way, they die in a way more befitting of themselves. Maybe. Oh, okay. I'm not sure. I'm not a game designer.
Similar to Spiritfarer, where I think in Spiritfarer you actually have to take them to the eventual place of rest, which basically means that you just end them at a specific point. So I mean, there's that. I mean, I would personally like any gods that I would actually like to see in any kind of game. I'd actually, weirdly enough, like, I love Smite because of the way that it does it, but it is basically just TDM sort of style combat where it's just, yeah, Anubis and Thor just go toe to toe, and they kill each other because Thor was 20 levels higher than Anubis, or the opposite. Or, Anubis pulled off his special ability, so he killed Thor quickly this time, despite the level difference, or whatever. Or, Heimdallr comes and kills, Zeus. And it's like, okay, alright. I mean, we don't know the differentiations in all of the different gods' powers, because obviously they're not in the same pantheons, but it's still kind of just... I don't know, to me it always felt a bit weird. As for me, I actually would love to see the Japanese sort of style of gods being sort of touched on, or at least the Celtic ones touched on in God of War. That would be interesting to me. I think a multi-pantheon game for God of War would be kind of interesting. I know that it's still on Norse at the moment, but maybe in the future we might be able to see something like future pantheons.
I did send you what they originally thought God of War was going to be, didn't I?
Yes.
Where it was essentially, instead of the ending being he killed all the gods, he actually teamed up with the God of Wars of other mythologies of the day. I think Norse, and I think also Egyptian. I think it was.
Yes, yeah.
To defeat all the gods, and then they became the three wise men at the end.
Oh, yeah.
Which
See,
would have been,
that would be
which would have been a bizarre thing, but interesting nonetheless. I think
that would be fantastic if they did that. I'm not going to lie. So, if any of you guys are game designers out there, or any of you guys are listening, get this towards the storyboard team of God of War. Make it happen. I will throw money at this project, because, just because we know where it's going to end doesn't mean that we know how we're going to get there, or even how amazing it's going to be. The feels that we'll feel, the drive that brings them to it. I mean, in all honesty, the Three Wise Men being the ending of it would be fantastic. But who knows? I'm not a game designer. Oh wait. So Alex, what about you? Any gods or demigods to be placed in a game or altered in a game?
Actually, well, I'm going. This is quite old, but there was actually a game that was kind of interesting, but unfortunately, it was a case of a great idea, poor execution.
Okay.
That, it was so bad it actually got featured on Jim Sterling's, terrible plays games. It was a video game about the Ramayana, which is a Sanskrit epic, and it's like a big thing in Indian culture, and it also has Hindu versions, Buddhist versions, and it dates back really early, and it's this great big swelling epic that's supposed to be like the formation of society, and it's got lots of political intrigue, and also the gods show up and do various things to help the characters, and yeah, it didn't work in the game sets because it was just it looked like a free trial of Unity engine, and it was just shoot some arrows, go across the map. Oh dear, this is the game. I would like something that maybe something like kind of an XCOM type thing, or maybe even a Civilizations type thing.
I'm not a fan of turn-based games, but then again, Pokemon is the only turn-based game that I've actually really enjoyed, so it's a really weird thing for anyone to say. So it's turn-based, and I immediately get turned off of it. But then I
love turn-based.
I can't
turn-based is great.
stand them.
No.
We are completely opposite.
Three. I mean, as you say.
Oh no.
Sam's been spited.
I think he's been spited. He spoke against the true ways of gaming, which is not turn-based. Isn't that right, Alex?
No.
You'll be spited too. Be careful. Be warned.
I mean, isn't tabletop turn-based technically?
Silence yourself, Sam. Silence yourself.
I go against the God King Emperor himself.
I mean, okay, I will point this out. I do get upset with turn-based combat, but I think it's mostly because that there are only a few turn-based combat games that I actually enjoy. The biggest ones are Pokemon, D&D, tabletop games, but I don't mind it when it's other people's turns. I also don't mind it when I don't get a turn, because I like to see exactly how it goes. But in a one-on-one situation, when you're like, okay, so it's my guys versus all of these guys, I'm not a big fan of it, in all honesty, turns and stuff. I don't know. quite hypocritical. I think for me, I'm just not a big fan of turn-based games, and it has to take something that's really very special to be able to get me out of that funk. Anyway, sorry. So that would be your sort of. I mean, for me, I actually okay. So this is going to be kind of a weird one, but I'd actually like to see. So I'd like to see, instead of you playing as a person who's under one of the gods, I'd actually like to see a game where you actually get to play as a god, and not necessarily again the whole thing of like, oh, it's TDM or anything, but I would actually like to see it where you actually get to play as a character who isn't like Baldur or Thor, like actually playing as one of the big bads, like, or at least, you know, the big dudes upstairs, like Zeus or Odin, or even having it that it's just like one of the more powerful ones, or at least even the progenitors of the gods, like for instance the Allfathers or the gods of the kings or the fathers of the gods, or even the Titans. But one that actually stands out to me the most is Zeus, because okay, the amount of different powers that Zeus has in his pantheon, Sam, I know that you want to talk about it, so I'm gonna bring it up. Having it that it's a young Zeus, and that he's gaining more power of his godhood, and not necessarily basing it off of the actual way that he gets all of his abilities, but instead actually having it that it's a story as to how it's like, you know, this even the storylines can go, oh, this is the true way that he gets his powers, but then based on slander, myth, legend, and legacy, people state that his true nature is different. Like for instance, how he is known as the god who has the lightning bolt. It's actually not his power of lightning. He actually just has a lightning bolt. I think he get it. He takes it from someone, or someone gets it.
By,
that's it.
By, I think, if I remember correctly, the 100-handers to defeat Sisyphus or something. It's a Titan he puts in the Valkyrie.
Either way, my point is that would be kind of an interesting. That would be kind of an interesting way if you play as a character similar to in God of War. You play as a character who has super strength, you know, super durability, maybe even healing ability. You know, oh, you're kind of immortal, but only gods and titans can kill other gods and titans, or even maybe the gods can't kill titans unless if it's a specific way or something. I don't know. But then having it that, like, in the story, you actually have it that Zeus is actually building up his different abilities. Like, for instance, being able to turn into gold dust, getting the lightning spear, having the ability to actually create his own children over time, so on and so forth. Until eventually, at the end of the game, he becomes the powerful deity that we have been led to believe he is/was. I would kind of like to see that story unfold. Similar to how you see it in God of War, where he beats the crap out of Hercules and steals his gauntlets that grant him even more super strength. He cuts off he cuts off Helios's head to be able to have like basically a flashlight or something. I can't remember.
Jeez.
Something.
Yeah, no, he doesn't. He rips it off. He doesn't.
There
cut it off.
we go. Yes.
That's not better. That's actually worse.
I know.
Clean. So there's that. So I mean, in all honesty, I'd like to see something like that. A god who gains his power over time, rather than a god who gets it from other ones. He actually gains it either, oh, you've suddenly unlocked this new power because it's something that you needed, or, oh, you were gifted this power, make it your own, or you were gifted this item, make it your own. I think that would be kind of interesting. And as you said, the 100-handers, did you say, or the 1,000-handers?
I think it's the 100-handers, if I remember correctly.
But yeah, having something like that could be kind of interesting, because then it's like either that's the starting point, you're given the bolt, or it's something that you have to lead up to, kind of like, ooh, here comes the hype train, my guys. Because, as we've seen in God of War, the biggest hype train was, oh, where are the Blades of Chaos? Even though that technically the Blades of Chaos were taken off him at the first game, and actually they're the Blades of Athena. No, they are the Blades of Chaos, or the Blades of Athena. I can't remember either way. Something or something.
No, it's different blades in the third game.
Yes, it's different blades in the third game. That's it. Thank you.
So many blades.
So we've been dancing around this for a while. We've been talking about that, but gods. What consummates as a god power? Now, in my in my in my eyes, I see god powers as absolute. Like, either there is no rival, or at least there is no mortal rival. Now, hang on, I'll let you speak, Sam, in a second, because I know that you have an opinion. These are opinions.
I know.
Or at least the way that I see it, the way that I've built gods in Animite Tales, at least, or at least in other stories that I've written. A lot of the times I see gods as beings that have absolute power, or at least they have so much power that they've outgrown the universe that they've existed in, to the point of which they either control all of that specific thing, or at least they are the living embodiment of it. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can literally stop the great heroes, because, you know, there's potentially an order to it, or even that they are now so beneath them that they no longer care because they have so much more that they are concerned with, or even just they're just living it up in God realm, or, you know, the existence outside of our own universe, or even because that they are part of our own universe now, that they just don't care in the way that we would normally care. But yeah, I usually consider a god's power is absolute, or at least is on such a massive cosmic scale. But even if we were to scale them down even further than that, I'd say they are powers without limit, transcendent above all else. Specifically, say for instance, you have a person who's like, say for instance, you've got someone who has super strength. They say, oh, I can lift up a mountain, or I can lift up this. A god of strength could potentially lift it up regardless of how much time that they would need. They just literally are able to do it instantly. Or a god, or a power, or a person who can like draw power from the sun, or even shoot out power, like fire or energy or whatever. But there's a certain amount that they can push out, or even there's a certain amount of times that they can use it before they power down. Or even potentially have recoil, like in certain other shows or films or anime. You know, you have it where there's like eventually the protagonists or a side character or even the villain eventually has a pushback before, okay, if I use this anymore, I'm either going to, quote unquote, anime spoiler here, shorten lifespan, or usually just deal damage to oneself. Whereas gods, they don't have that limitation. That's my opinion anyway. I don't know what else you guys think of.
Alex, do you want to go first? Because I'm going to probably go on a no. I'm going to go on a long tangent here after this. I'm going to go on a gigantically long tangent. I think you should go first here and give your opinions before I give mine.
I'm good. Sam is powering up.
Oh yes,
Sam is getting the nerd god key from Sam.
I've already got Star Trek reference in mind for this.
Oh no! All right, well I'll let it happen. I spoke my piece. I spake. So let's go, Alex.
Well, I mean, I kind of have to agree with you really, because like my only example that I had here, because I'm not a nerd, I'm a jock. I didn't do any research.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Was really just really like Apocalypse and X-Men, and he is the first mutant first of all. So he like, you know, he is sort of the progenitor of like all of mutant kind. So that's kind of got this whole thing. And he has just this huge list of powers that come from his ability to have self-molecular control, which is like a total control over his own molecular system, which includes, you know, his ability to shapeshift, his ability to take damage, to deal damage, and to also augment other powers into himself, you know, and to, I suppose, well, it gives him immortality, basically, because he just says no to aging. He says no to damage, no to aging. He has this just from this one ability of total control over his own body.
I love Apocalypse because of so many different reasons, but he is probably the first example that I would say is the difference between an almighty, otherworldly god and an actual physical one. Because depending on which canon you look at it, being that he was either given technology that outclassed him all in all of the different things, or even being that he was just a mutant who eventually evolved to such ridiculous power. Either way, he is still so powerful that he just is more and more powerful. He just gains powers over time, either that or in the movie universe, he transfers his consciousness to a new body each time so that he can basically keep getting more and more different powers till eventually he basically is a god. But supposedly he's the first mutant. There's so many different ways that you can look at it to make him either the progenitor or of the god of his own kind. And that's, I think, really tying into what Sam said earlier, is that, you know, like, you have the gods that basically create the universe, do all these things, have domains over such massive bodies of existence, and then you just, as you go down further and further, you have them different domains, and the domain of god of mutants seems so small and minuscule.
But he's it.
He is it, yeah, exactly. He's the closest thing to a god of mutants, absolutely.
He has a Jesus figure as well, you know, because in one continuity he has a son, unfortunately named Holocaust. I mean, it is what it is. It was
I know
90s.
you're not making it up, but it doesn't make it any better.
I know. It's a shame because
the 90s.
Because his design is actually really cool looking. He's like a giant light monster thing, but it's like, yeah, he is like just the second in command. Like he's, you know, got all of his father's abilities, but is still like second in command. It's just like the son, and doesn't have all of the same things. And it's like, yeah, it's clear what they're aping here. It's like he is a god on Earth. You know, he's like, you know, he creates his own mythology. And I kind of like it for, because on one hand he is like literally a god. I mean, he has a god complex, but he can back it up with his actual powers, which makes him more dangerous. That's what I kind of like in the movies. Like his backstory, you know, for evil is basically just like, well, I have all of these powers. I am a god. Is anyone going to disagree with me? No? Okay, I'll just be a god then.
I mean, you are right. You are absolutely right. I mean, I don't know about...
Like, he even has disciples.
Yes, he has disciples, yeah.
He has his four, like, his
Horsemen
four...
of Apocalypse,
Yeah. And, like, that he even makes them better.
Yeah, he
is
empowers
so
them. I mean, I swear he does it to Wolverine, where he turns Wolverine into...
No.
Because he either turns...
Oh, in the comics, maybe?
Yeah, in the in the comics. I'm not talking about the films. How dare you, Sam? I am not a basic boy. Sam. Treading on thin ice, man. No. I don't know. Those natural 20s are going to go away very quickly. No, what I was going to say was... I gave you quite a lot of XP for that last session. Stay tuned on Sundays. I would say that, like, so in the comics, he turns Wolverine, he makes Wolverine one of the Horsemen, and he actually becomes either Death or, I think it's either Death or Famine, one of the two. And when he becomes it, it grants him 100% immortality. Nothing can stop him. I think there's even a moment where Omega Red tries to use his carbonadium against him, and it does nothing. It's like, aha, it slows your healing factor down, and he just keeps walking through all of his attacks, and it's like, previously we've seen that any carbonadium or any radiation or anything like that temporarily slows down his healing factor, and yet he's just like, no. Nothing stops him, nothing kills him, and it is just insane the amount of strength. I think his senses are high, and literally everything about his powers are increased, including his seemingly immortality. So... yeah, I quite like it, Apocalypse. And also his Horseman. Magneto. Hashtag Hulk was the best.
Yep.
I'm not a Wolverine fanboy.
Not sure, you know, just hiding all the merch in your closet. It's just...
Joke's on you, I don't have any merch.
Hiding your...
I sold it all.
Making sure to put down your new hairstyle and your beard. You're stylized.
I mean, in all honesty, if I ever look like Old Man Logan, I will be able to die happy, impaled on a tree.
You like, we'll just have like a little action figure of you and eulogize over you, you know.
Yes, please. Anyways.
That'll be your actual funeral plan. We'll just reenact that scene from Logan. Anyway,
so we'll stop talking about next Tuesday. So, oh no, Tuesday's tomorrow. So Sam, you have something to add to this. What in your opinion consummates a god, or at least godlike powers?
I would not even consummate all powerful. as you have done, or even complete domination over one specific domain. I would simply say pretty much the same level almost as superheroes, because they're not all powerful or all seeing or infallible. They like the closest example I could think that people could understand is, for those who have seen the original Star Trek series, Trillian. Have either of you seen the Squire of Gothos episode?
No.
Okay.
We are
essentially in
swine.
that.
I'm a job. I don't know any of this Star Trek.
Incorrect,
Okay.
but go on.
Okay, have you heard of Q?
Yeah.
From
No.
The Next Generation. Okay. Well,
I've never watched Star Trek.
Okay. Okay. I'm just going to explain the basic idea.
Okay.
Essentially, they land on a planet. I mean, they don't even land. They just go towards this planet, and two of their crewmen disappear from just on board the ship. And when they go down, they discover the planet is this inhospitable wasteland, except for like this one single square mile, which is designed like from the Napoleonic era. And they meet this weird man called Trillian, who says he's a general and a squire, and just created these things with just a flick of his fingers.
Okay.
But as it goes on, they discover that he's been viewing Earth, but considering the planet's been 900 miles away, he's not taken in the time differential from looking at the Earth to between now. So that's why he's made it look like the Napoleonic era and is confused by them being able to travel in space. And speaks in such a
yeah, that's the
weird
travel of light, isn't it? That's based on the travel of light. Sorry, continue.
Alright, so it's 900 years past, and like he's created food and fires, but the fire doesn't have any heat. The food has no flavor. So he's not like he has great power. He has power to create things from the instance, but he can't actually see the substance of them, if you get my meaning.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I actually have a question based on Terry Pratchett universe. Then, in that case, okay.
Yes, I was going to lead into that.
What?
As well.
What? Okay. Okay. Does death, as in the embodiment of death, the skull, cloak, and dagger? Do you the scythe, the wielding? Do you consummate him as a god, or do you consummate him as an angel of death? Both of you. I'm just
he's an anthropomorphic personification.
Yes, I know, Sam. I'm so glad that you are also a Terry Pratchett fan, and we'll get back to this immediately. We'll nerd out about it together, but let's ask.
I disagree. I think that pretty much you are a god at that point. Like, if you are a personification, I don't feel that there's much of a distinction between the two.
I would
god and a personification. I mean, other than like, I guess, your amount of worshippers. But even then, there are people who worship death.
To be fair, it's not about worship, because even people who don't believe in the gods still die, and they still see him when he comes to their soul.
I think he's a god. I would say he's a god.
Are we
staying strictly in the Terry Pratchett universe, or just in general?
Okay. Well, let's say in the usual concept of death, in the terms of skull, cloak, and scythe, we're actually saying the Horseman of Apocalypse, or even just general thing. Because I mean, obviously in Terry Pratchett universe, he is, as he states himself, a personification, an anthropomorphical personification, which is actually, funny enough, where the term anthropial came from in the terms of race, because they're anthropomorphic and they're actually a different type of race, as they are part human and part something else. Some would actually call them Anthrosapiens, but enough about that. So what would you consider him, Sam? Then what would you or them?
I would say beyond God. I would say I almost go primordial. Essentially, like in the beginning there was nothing.
I mean, death isn't necessarily nothing. It's the end of.
No, I don't mean that. No, I'm not saying that, but in the beginning there was nothing, and then there was something.
Yeah.
In that exact moment, death also existed.
I have to say.
So I would say.
No, go on.
Yeah. That's at that point. I would say beyond. It depends, depending on again mythology and various different levels of godhood we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Like if we're saying, in my mind, I think beyond godhood at that point, because. Again, even in some mythologies, gods do die.
Yes, I would definitely agree with you, but I think, in all honesty, it depends on the mythology. Obviously, as certain mythologies state that they can, others state that in their afterlife, like Valhalla and heaven and stuff like that, it's like, things can't die once they get to this particular thing, or at least if they do, they never state otherwise. So, I
would still say that like a god above gods.
I would. Okay. Here's my thought process. Death is a harbinger of literally death. He is the personification of himself. So the personification of the end of life. He either cannot exist or cannot have any power over those that cannot die. Because if it could never die in the first place, or it just cannot die now by any means, if not any natural means, death cannot kill it. So because of that, I'd have to state that if something can die, even gods, certain gods can potentially die, depending on the specific scenario. And, depending on, as Sam said, based on mythology, Death's scythe and Death's sword, depending on which you look at it, which, by the way, is actually based on an old legend, that Death himself actually wields one of the swords of heaven. But it's an old legend, and it's actually written after the Bible, and I think it's something to do with more based on the Quran, because the angel of death, Azrael, is actually more mentioned in the Quran. Anyway, it's either the Quran or something of one of the ancient.
You're not thinking of the killing of the innocent, or like killing of the firstborn?
No. Basically, in the old things of Solomon, there's a depiction of the angel of death, and he has a scythe, but in another one he actually has a blade, and therefore they actually stated that death's, in many legends, there's actually a thing that Death's scythe is actually not one weapon, it's actually an arsenal of weapons, either that shapeshifts, or he can summon one or any type of weapon that he specifically chooses, either the blade that enters people into the next life, the scythe that reaps the souls, a guillotine that ends the cycle, as in it stops the cycle of rebirth, and finally the noose, as in the hanged man, in the terms of the old tarot cards, that he would one day give it to a person that would eventually end themselves. So using that as that particular mythology, there's so many different ways that you can see death, and I personally would say that Death may be a god, but I also would state that he may be an angel. And the reason that I state that he's an angel is because in the eyes of mortals, even beings like angels could be considered gods. And I can't remember if it's in the Bible or if it's in one of the old scriptures of one of the religions that shows proof of angels in their writings. It says, well, maybe proof isn't the right word, but you know what I mean. It says they are tools of the Lord, or at least they're tools of the God who created them. Do not praise them as gods. So they might be so powerful that it is even mistakenly us who would conceive them as gods. So because of that, I think that death isn't a god. That's my opinion. That's my sort of way of looking at it, anyway. Based on the two things that you have given me, and based on the things that I sort of create myself, and so on and so. As a writer and as a game developer, I would not state that death is a god. I would state more that death is either a pseudo-god, an angel, or at least a tool of all of the gods that eventually kill. Either that, or eventually it's a creation of the universe, a fact of reality that eventually either things will end, or things that are given life but not immortality eventually will die. Because the whole point of life, the goal of all life is death, as once was said by the great and powerful Einzelgone.
I'm definitely thinking of a different opinion there, because I think that it really does depend on the actual power level. Like, yes, he could be a tool, sure, but as we've seen, if death operates of like, there is no like escaping it, like, and there is like no order, like a god cannot order someone to die if they cannot die, then technically he is more powerful than these gods. So even using him as a tool isn't really an accurate description, because they can't use him as a tool. He's his own freelancer.
Well, it depends, because as Sam will know, in certain forms of mythology, some gods create their own children to do the things that they cannot, or when they create their children, they take an essence of their power, therefore meaning the god cannot do it, but their child now has that power to do so. I thought Sam was going to back me up here.
I mean, I have no idea what you're talking about, to be honest.
Oh, okay. Because
I mean, to be honest, I thought you were going to mention Thanatos, and that's what I immediately thought you were thinking of, but no.
I can't remember the direct references. Sam,
No.
you're my Wikipedia
Thanatos,
here.
No. Thanatos is, he's a titan who is the messenger. He essentially is death. Like, he is the god of death, but many people also are in the process, like even Hermes is in the process of reclaiming the dead. And
Yes.
he doesn't decide when people die, but the fates do.
Which
So
another
it's-
thing is actually another point is that like there's actually a multitude of different things that there are gods of fate, and then there are fate goddesses, angels of fate, or even just women who were given the powers of fate, and therefore they ascended to demigod or god level, or just as I said, angels.
Or even be of gods.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Above God. Because gods are afraid of fate.
Yes,
often.
in certain mythologies, fate is more powerful than the gods, which again kind of contradicts certain factors of the gods. But as we said, gods don't necessarily gods not depending on the way that you look at it, not all gods and not necessarily any gods are above everything. Now, again, depending on the story of the universe, but we kind of have gotten bogged down into this discussion about that. I mean, to be fair, I don't know. I mean, I would say, okay, demigods. What in your opinion consummates those, Alex?
What constitutes a demigod?
So we've been talking about what constitutes or consummates the creation of a demigod. Obviously, you can either have the creation of it, or at least what categorizes a demigod.
It would probably be like, it has to be like on a lower tier, because it's like you can't because the difference between a god and a demigod is that there are downsides to their powers. Like, for instance, they maybe could be killed, or they don't have much power. They don't have like omnipotence or omnipresence, but they do have the all power. So that could be it, I suppose. It's like, it's weird how meritocratic, god systems are actually, that I think about it.
I mean, as someone who has created many different types of gods, angels, demigods for this game, for this universe, I would have to say that demigods are more consummating, as in my opinion anyway, is more the ones that, even if they can die, gods can die, I feel like demigods are easier to kill. They are more of the flesh, they are more of the human body, or at least they have more limitations. Either put there by the god that oversees it, or by the fact that it's just that they are half mortal. Not necessarily stating that they don't have downsides, but they might not necessarily have them as well. Like, as Sam said, they could be superhumans. But I would say the difference between a superhuman and a demigod who has superhuman powers would be like the difference between, like, say for instance, Superman, by almost every freaking means, is a god. He is so powerful. But in early iterations, or even in other situations, he might only be considered or constitute or be at least categorized as a demigod.
But is his main difference though his humanity though? Because gods in general are kind of above,
I mean, I'm just going to put this out now. Mistletoe, hair being cut, or kryptonite all have all things that have powerful abilities will eventually have a weakness that lowers their power, or that can harm them.
Okay.
I mean, fair enough, Baldur is still considered a god, but either way, a lot of different gods have different weaknesses.
I don't think Samson was a god, to be honest.
No.
I'm assuming you're related, but he did have the strength of God.
He did have the strength of a god, or strength of God, if you were actually to look into that, yeah. So, I mean, either that or he was just very powerful because of his devotion to God. I mean, it's, a lot of interpretation there, depending on it. Yes, I was just mostly stating the factor of a weakness. I state that Samson is not a god because he had a weakness. But I'm not stating that Balder is not a god because he had a weakness, because Samson ultimately was human. However, just because that Superman is not a human, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's not a god, but also doesn't necessarily mean that he is. I don't know. Care to weigh in, Sam? I feel like...
Oh, no, I mean, I would say one thing. It's not just their ability to be broken physically, though, but also broken psychologically.
I mean, some gods also can. I mean, that.
Yeah.
I really wish Bill or my brother or Kane were here, because the two of them have a lot of knowledge on not only the Elder Scrolls but also the Dark Souls lore. And one of the biggest ones is gods and mythology. Dark Souls. Gods can go very much mad, and in certain forms of Dungeons and Dragons, no less, the gods can only be harmed by psychic damage.
Or disbelief.
Well, or disbelief, yes, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's from what I remember, that's mostly the only way you can, like, gods can truly ever die, is to stop believing in them.
Or kill
sure, you can kick
followers.
I mean, you can kill them, yeah, but... Yeah. But no, if I would not categorize a demi-human, or a demigod, even as having superpowers. Because quite a lot of demigods, or at least some of them, don't even have superpowers or anything. Okay, I'll say it like this. They are born of God and man, and usually have a great destiny in something or another. Doesn't necessarily mean fighting.
Yeah.
But they usually lean towards doing something great. Like Asclepius, who was, I think, the son of Helios, I want to say. I'm probably wrong there.
My man.
But he was he was a great healer. He wasn't a fighter, he just made loads of healing cures. And he actually even created the secret of immortality, which of course Zeus was pissed off at and immediately laser bolted him from Olympus.
Of course.
But of course, he brought him back as a god because, he was a god at that point. But, like even Perseus was a demigod, and his great destiny was killing the Medusa.
So, in short terms, would you state that a demigod has to be born from a god, or would you say that is the minimum requirement? You don't have to have powers, but just be born of a god to at least be constituted as one.
I mean, that's why I call it demigod.
Okay.
It's because they are born of... That's the only thing I would say. They have to be born of at least... Maybe not born from God, but at least like have parentage of God and man.
Okay, then. Alright, so before I move on to the questions that actually are more based on Animite Tales lore and logic, then, I'm actually going to throw one last one at you. If a god gives a human a power and they say that you have godlike abilities, does that still make you a demigod, or does that make you a god?
I would say it makes you neither. It makes you an avatar of the god.
So is Kratos the god of war then? Is he a god, really?
Yeah, because he took the powers. I suppose. No, he claimed the domain after defeating the god of war, much like... But Zeus claimed the domain of the skies, and Poseidon claimed the domain of the sea. At that point, he gained the power of godhood.
They do still state that he is a god, though. They do still state he is a god and he becomes god. But they actually state when he finds out that he's actually born of Zeus, he is actually born of Zeus and a woman of Sparta, which means that he is
a demigod.
He is a demigod, but then he gains god power, so he's actually. He actually ascends to godhood. Now, there is technicality in that, where there's a moment where he says to Atreus, "I was born a god, boy," and it's like, actually, you were born a demigod. It wasn't until after you beat the god of war and then basically ascended to his throne that you actually became one. So, I'd say that godhood isn't necessarily demigodhood isn't necessarily something that you're born as. It is something.
I mean, yes, it was, because he was born a demigod.
Yes. In that circumstance, but people can ascend to demigod level. People can be considered demigod level, or at least people can be considered demigods if they are that powerful. Or would you say the only way that they can become considered a demigod is if they're just, yeah, you are considered a demigod level, but you're not actually a demigod. And then, oh, when you ascend to godhood, you actually are a god at that point because you have ascended to godhood. So you either are born a god, born a demigod, or a mortal that eventually ascends to godhood. You can never ascend to demigod. That's what I'm asking. Do you think that there is a way that you could basically categorize someone as ascending to demigod without consummating it as more of a title or a level?
I would say you can ascend to godhood, you cannot ascend to demigodhood. Because godhood involves a lot of areas, big and small.
Yes.
As I said, Macaria is a goddess, but her domain is just good death. That is technically a relatively small portion.
But still...
The god is Zeus, and he is domain of the entire sky and heavens and earth and all that.
Okay. What do you think? What do you think, Alex? Say, for instance, if Aspen got to the level that they are now in the 24-hour campaign, which, by the way, will be coming back at some point, but we won't be doing a 24-hour stream, so if you guys actually want to have a look at that, check that out. We'll probably be doing that on a Saturday. Probably around about maybe 6 hours or 9 hours instead of an actual 24-hour campaign. Plug.
I want, Aspen to ascend to godhood. I don't think that they're a god for numerous reasons, because there is still limit to their powers. I mean, they could still get knocked out pretty easily. They're still hanging by a thread a lot of time.
Would you consider that they are a demigod of healing and regenerative power, or of natural order? Because they control biological form, and they order biology to their very whim. They control nature to their very whim. I'm not...
That's so ironic, considering that they're so chaotic.
Yes, but they still control it. However, they control at least natural organisms, or at least natural form. So, technically, if someone says, oh, that's not the natural formation of this, or, oh, that's not natural, it is when I do it, because I control only the things that are nature or biological. In other words, living and literally natural. I make it natural. So there's that. But then obviously in a vacuum, if you put them next to Cosmos has almost no power compared to Aspen. Holding the staff of a demigod, though, and then they basically have godlike power, and then they have much more. But also, they were the only one who was able to wield that. For those who don't know, basically, in a campaign that we were doing, we had a character who had similar powers to another character, nature manipulation and telekinesis, versus Alex's character who had nature manipulation and biology manipulation. We had it that eventually they found a staff. The staff was left over by a demigod who wielded an ancient power known as the Salt of the Earth. It basically amplified their abilities by many times over, and they could create nature by almost any power or limitation. But ultimately they had a mortal form. They created a staff that was known as the Staff of Danu, and eventually it was left inside of a tree that she then placed in the centre of an entire island that she created all by herself. About nearly 80 years later, this character, Cosmos, picked up the staff and was worthy of it. Anyone who wasn't immediately got chloroformed, or chlorified, I think it was. Yeah, chlorified, not chloroformed. Just ragged. Chlorified, which basically meant that they turned literally into a tree or plant life. And then it was stated that until the wielder of the staff actually was the true wielder, all of the souls stayed in the tree, which was horrifying.
There was just so many screams. Many screams.
But afterwards, all of the souls were finally released. Although we did actually confirm a number. I think we said 107 souls were finally released from the tree. 107.
That's a lot of attempts. That's a lot of attempts.
Two of which were Cosmos's actual parents, because Cosmos got raised by the sentient leftover soul remains of almost a programmed personality by Danu known as Chlorite, who was basically an anthropial of literally tree and nature matter. It's so weird.
What's great about that is that they were such irresponsible parents. Like they took a little toddler into, I like to imagine that they were like either really powerful parakinetics or like nature manipulators and stuff. Or
oh no, we confirmed we confirmed one as a terrakinetic, one as a nature manipulator, but they were both adventurers, and they both came to that island. When she was 1, she had the mother had her in a little papoose rucksack thing. We even confirmed this because Chlorite even stated that she was in a little backpack satchel.
Those are bad parents.
Those are bad parents.
At least that's something that Aspen and Cosmos have in common. Terrible parents.
I mean, okay, fair enough. So the point is, in the game, we actually had it that anyone who wields the Staff of Danu can amplify their power by multiple amounts of times. I think isn't it like 10 times the range, and it adds literally 2d10s onto any of your terrakinetic, biological manipulation, or nature manipulation powers. However, if you're not worthy of the staff, it will start slowly chlorifying your body, turning it into wood, and eventually turning the entire body into a statue made of plant life. So because of that, that's sort of that. So I mean, like, I don't know, is there any other kind of gods that you guys would consider is to be within that sort of realm of possibility, or do you at least specifically think that there's any gods that you'd like to, or at least any characters in D&D games, or at least any of the games that you guys have played in, whether it's Animite Tales, D&D, or anything else, that you would consummate as god-like, demigod level, demigods, or gods?
Actually, I do have one. I would really like Irving to be godlike. I mean, in terms of just the roles that we got for Irving, I mean, Irving has outwitted godlike beings before just by getting natural 20s on, like, I mean, he practically has omnipresence and omnipotence. He's like, he can see things that are just not there by his incredible, perception powers.
Would you say omnipresence though? I mean, it's more that if it's Irving anyway, it's more that he just senses a lot of stuff. It's less omnipresent.
Well, yeah, it's not quite godlike yet, but definitely could possibly be. I mean, there is also like an Omega. I don't know if you've kept this form of Omegan, which has the kind of meta powers where it's like we get like immediate metallurgy. He's not quite there yet, but it's like getting close to like demigodhood, where it's like, there's no getting past it. He will sense it. He will sense every single molecule.
I would personally argue against that, only because that I think that, as Sam had originally consummated, it's more basically of a domain, and I think it's more like Irving's powers are more based on perception, and I don't think that it's necessarily godhood. I mean,
Irving could be god of all-seeing, or god of like vampire hunting. Artemis is.
I mean, God of the Hunt is actually a thing in multiple forms of stories.
Artemis.
Yeah,
well, it could be like it could be more specific. Like it could be more specific, like God of hunting the unnatural, God of the unnatural hunt.
I mean, yeah. I mean, to be fair,
it wouldn't be godhood, but it would be like demigodhood. I think very, very specific, probably for Irving. It's like it's become like just sort of like getting to that level. Really, if they were like lower level, it wouldn't even be a conversation. It's like they're just very perceptive. But we've had so many experiences now where it's like just like seeing things that no human would. Like it's just impossible at this point. It has to be sort of like blessed by the heavens level of perception. You're muted, Joe.
Oh no!
Yeah, sorry, someone just came in. So, I mean, Sam, do you have any things to add to Alex's thing, or do you even have your own?
About how Irving is demigod level?
I would say demigod level. I don't necessarily know that they are a god. I mean, I could never say no to ascend of god level, or even people just concern themselves as, I mean, you know, a faith or belief system around Irving of hunter of unnatural, or at least specifically hunter of vampires, god of hunting vampires specifically, considering the amount of different gods that you can get in so many different pantheons. Because I think there's like, in certain ones, there's like gods of... I'm sure that there's, in someone's pantheon, there's probably something somewhere where there's the god of awkward moments in elevators. I don't know, but either
I
way...
think that's a Terry Pratchett god, isn't it?
I mean, there is the god of hangovers, and the toenail fairy. No, the Veruca fairy. That's it. The Veruca gnome. That's it. The Veruca gnome.
Yes.
Took me a while.
I'm trying to think if there is anyone I know that's close to godhood,
or at least is or could be considered that level by someone else.
I would say pretty much every character could essentially be almost godlike, depending on where they are. Like an example being, Superman.
Yeah.
On Earth, he's essentially a god. On Krypton, he's like everyone else.
But that's more
because but if Krypton had a yellow sun,
okay, fair enough, and lower yield of gravity.
Yeah, everyone would be godlike, but to everyone else, they'd all just be normal. But on Earth, with everyone being weak and fragile and puny, in comparison, he is godlike. However, on another planet where, let's say, there's a yellow sun, but it creates beings that are far more powerful than Superman, and Superman were to go there, he'd be thought of as more pretty much an ant among gods.
So it is at that point.
It depends on circumstance.
In that
depends
case,
on where you are.
Do you consider Superman to be a god or god level, or is it just only because of his physiology that he is that lucky to be that powerful?
Well, he is worshipped by a lot of people.
Yeah, but
and people do like ask him for things. They do pray to him.
But
he's practically a god, in a way. In a matter of speaking, people believe in him. But they expect him to solve all their problems.
Sam, do you think that he is actually a god? Do you think he is a god? Not god level, do you think he is actually a god? In the universe?
No, because they have actual gods in that universe. And
we know for
So
yeah, they have he has met Heracles and Zeus, and I mean, he did wipe the floor with Hercules, if I remember correctly.
He also beats Atlas and Hercules in an arm wrestling competition, which, by the way, I want to point out is completely just the two gods and demigods of strength. I'm so upset about that, but
I mean, I'm more than happy with that, because Hercules in the DC universe is, for lack of a better term, bad. He is evil. He is malicious. He is evil.
Okay, yes, but you know what? Never mind. But okay,
I'm more than happy with him constantly feeling in every direction.
even though that he is based on, fine. Okay, so
I mean,
in a game, do you think that it would be possible in a tabletop game? Do you think it would be possible to play with someone on the same side as you who is considered to be a demigod? I know that there's Asimar in D&D, but do you think that would be possible?
Yes, because I've heard of it. Because there was, have any of you heard of the Spoony one?
Oh yeah, I know Spoony one. Yeah.
He spoke of a story where he ascended, like his character was the Spoony bard called, I can't remember now. Actually, really feel bad now. But essentially, he ascended up into godhood and actually took over from the god of traveling, and became a god of traveling. And of course, as a bard with a natural 18 charisma, he got into places, got with other gods and goddesses. Essentially, got thrown off Olympus by Zeus and lost godhood.
Oh, okay.
After kind of getting with, I think it was, is he Aphrodite or Athena? It was one of the goddesses that he kind of got on with. I was just kind of spotted. And then he joined up with another party, but he was still very high level, but he was still like, people knew of him as like Hogar's replacement as a god of wanderers. But he's still, he's still, by definition, kind of, sort of. He was a fallen god, but he still, nonetheless, teamed up with a group of people. I was able to do so, probably quite easily.
What about you, Alex? What are your opinions on gods or demigods being fellow players alongside you, puny mortals?
Well, I have played alongside Phileas for a long time. So yeah, I'm you can work.
I want to point out, Phileas is definitely not a god. He died, as we all know.
And he came back like Jesus. My God.
I was hoping you'd say that.
I mean, Phileas did better. He came back 3 hours later.
Jesus,
he came back 1 day later, exactly.
Exactly. The stone was removed. It was just... He's a god. He is. I'm sorry, but he is at this point. He's like... He may not have been born a god, but he's certainly become a god.
But based on the same circumstances as Superman, it was based on those circumstances. He had Phoenix abilities, and he had the power to become stronger based on the sun or photonic or any kind of light energy that he was able to absorb into his body to bolster up his strength temporarily. And he could become either a Phoenix or hybrid mode of Phoenix human hybrid. And thanks to his Phoenix ability, every time that he dies, he can then resurrect after 24 hours or so on and so forth. But thanks to his technique, he was able to bring himself back after 24 hours without a gamble. But then he loses almost all of his power for 24 hours after his resurrection.
Just needs to check into a nice Airbnb for 24 hours and then he's back to godhood. That's...
I mean...
Dude is at least a demigod at this point in terms of power.
Okay, after coming from seeing what exactly his father is, fair enough. If people haven't seen it, I might post it up on the actual thing itself so that people can actually see it. But pretty much what Phileas's father is known as Solus Soul. If I can actually have that posted up at some point, maybe you might be able to see it. If I post it up on here now on the screen, there we go. I'll just pop it there. There we go. Solus Soul, a man made of fire. Literally a fire mimic. He can turn his entire body into flame. And don't worry about looking under anything because his entire molecules actually become fire itself, or at least they generate a heat that creates fire. All of the body parts can be separated. So basically he has no physical form other than fire. The only way to stop him in the terms of turning him back is nullification or water. But you can still harm him through other means. He's immune to fire and physical damage, but you can still shock him, hit him with energy, water, ice, and other means. But yes, he has the power of star mimicry, which basically makes him as powerful as a sun. A small sun, but still a sun. I think we calculated that his power is he can generate fires up to 2,500 degrees, and then in a star mode he can generate temperatures of up to 5,000 degrees Celsius. I'm going to point this out now so that people don't go Fahrenheit, or Celsius. And because that we figured that out, basically this makes him the most powerful being in the entirety of the canon. And yeah, I might be a bit of a fanboy.
Except for maybe Johnny Storm, the Human Torch.
No, he would.
No, he would destroy Johnny Torch.
I mean, Johnny Torch.
Yeah, no, I'm not even giving him his proper name.
Would take his fingers and snuff him out like a candle, like nothing.
I mean,
like,
considering he could become as hot as the sun. Considering at one point, like they even say he could break the atmosphere, he'd burn the atmosphere if he went any hotter.
The only reason that I have to believe this, is because Solus Soul has an immunity to fire and a resistance to energy equal to his own output. But it's also because that he also does technically not have a physical form. He assimilates to any fire that he becomes a part of. And because of that, he could just outburn Johnny Storm because no heat that Johnny could ever create would ever be enough to harm Solus. And that's the problem. That's why Phileas had to figure a way as to how to be able to harm his dad, because he was trying to figure a way to be able to defeat him. And I think at this point, now I'm saying it out loud, yeah, okay, if he's not at least considered a demigod, he is of at least demigod level. So yeah, fair enough. Fair enough, Alex.
Yeah.
So here's the question here then. Postriel, Eretuf, Emmet, also known as Legion, 3 beings under the guise of Tempus, father of time itself, the time god. He has 3 children. All of them are exceptionally powerful, but when introduced into the physical plane, they can die. Now, when they die, their souls return back to their father's domain in their sort of afterlife dimension. But ultimately, their physical forms can die. Are they demigods, gods, angels, or none of the above?
Well, we know that Legion was no angel, so.
Boo! Boo!
I would say no, but for real though, I think they are kind of angels in that sense, because they are like, well, they're supposed to like, you know, do Daddy's bidding and stuff. Who is a god, or essentially a god, and they can of course fall. Like they do, you know, they do eventually return to the domain. You know, they don't die for it. They don't blink out of existence. Like their souls are still there, and they can like resurrect and stuff, I guess, in another human form, I suppose. So I would say that they are essentially supposed to be tools of their father, who is a god. So I would call them angels, you know, rather than demigods. And they are like representative of, you know, at least that's what I got for it. They're representative of certain aspects of time. You know, and they all have specific jobs, so they act more as emissaries, I suppose.
Yeah, in Animite Tales, you have Tempus, the god of time, and then you have his 3 children. Postriel, the god of the present, or at least he's known as either god or angel of the present. You then have Emmet, the god of the past, or angel of the past, and Eretuf, the god of the future, or at least the foreseer of the future. All of them have abilities based on the specific domain that their father has given them, but Tempus himself actually has the powers over all of them, and even is the living embodiment of all time throughout all of the multiverse. But he still has children that have not only these powers, but also they have graces that he has bestowed upon them. On top of this, Postriel, his firstborn, is the realm ruler of his universe. So in Animite Tales, there's the Omegaverse, which is basically the heaven or the afterlife dimension. And the demigods and the gods reside in these particular pocket locations, kind of like almost kingdoms of an infinite, constant, ever-expanding world. And because of this, one of the children, or basically the chosen of the gods, watches over their kingdom, because despite their power, the gods still can't meddle in the afterlife because they are still too big to exist in it. Plus, the gods lose the chance at having their soul being the same thing because they basically exist in a space above all creation, known as the metaverse, because they're meta beings, metaphorical, metaphysical, meta-powerful, you know, meta-potent, I guess you could say. So, I don't know, Sam, you've been awfully quiet. What do you think Legion is?
I've been debating this, because considering what Alex just said there, that makes perfect sense that they're angels. But the fact that they have their own domain, specifically of, considering they're specialized in different eras of time.
They are specialized.
I also kind.
No, go.
But also, I was going to say, I want to say gods, but I also want to say angels, because even this thought came to mind was the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, or Christmas yet to come. They are not gods. Nor are they angels. They're simply ghosts. So I kind of want to go with the idea that they're angels, and the fact that they have the fact that they have a human form on Earth that can be killed doesn't clash with any of my ideas about angels or gods, because that is what they are, just on Earth, just flesh and blood, essentially.
Okay.
Like that's, I mean, even in their own palaces and domains, like Zeus got drugged, and almost he got drugged unconscious and almost had like a coup against him.
I mean, I think it's even possible for things to be killed in the Omegaverse. It's just that they don't die permanently. It's just what happens when you kill something, quote unquote, kill. Its soul then is just instantaneously dispersed and reformed in a random location, which technically can be a form of hell. If, say, for instance, you are outside of one of the gods' domains, if you are then killed, you then instantly transport to either one of the other gods' random domains or any random space in the entire Omegaverse. And consider that certain locations in the Omegaverse are considered as purgatory, where all sorts of creatures, monsters, and even evil people who didn't reside on any of the, or even believe in any of the, or even cause or commit crimes in any of the names of the gods, they basically roam free. Because of this, they basically can eventually get to other neutral zones in the Omegaverse, which means that they can actually start attacking and fighting other people. Can be killed, but then they just get sent to random locations. Sometimes they even get sent to other dimensions. And funnily enough, every single realm, or I guess you could say kingdom at that point, of the different gods and demigods, they're a form of heaven for most, or a form of hell for sinners of their specific pantheons. So say, for instance, if you're an atheist of all of the gods, just do not believe in any of them, that is fine. If you're a good person, you usually end up in a neutral zone or a specific personalized heaven, or at least a neutral zone that is the best location for, particularly based on your own, I guess you could say, reality or wishes or wants. But if you actually believed in a god and did things in their name, as long as you were a good person and did things in their name specifically, you can go to their realm and basically it's creates a heaven for yourself. Or if you did things against their name, basically kind of like the equivalent of basically terrorism, going against their particular commandments, or even specifically doing bad deeds in their name or blaming them for it. Welcome to the heaven dimension. We're now going to turn this into your personal hell. Where you literally just get basically tortured for the rest of eternity. Unless if someone can free you. So, I mean, that's kind of how it really goes in the Animite Tales universe. Like, for the mortals, if they die, they go there. But yes, there are basically angels and demigods that sort of rule over those locations. I, personally, as their creator, I don't know if I would consider them as either demigods, gods, or angels. I don't mind the idea of them being considered angels, because they are birthed of their father, they have less power than their father, but unlike with Zeus and some of his other children, they're not necessarily beings that have abilities that are completely different from what their father has. They're just mini-me's of him, and they are almost tools that he uses. I don't know if you have anything to add on that specific notion.
I don't know. I can't fit it. I think that's pretty succinct from like Legion lore, and especially since like it's very fitting considering how Legion is currently is.
Yes.
As a fallen angel.
For those who don't know, a friend of ours, Alfie, he created the character. I mean, you might have heard him in some of the other previous podcasts. He actually created the character Legion. Based off of one of the gods that I created for this campaign. Eventually, I actually made Legion as an official character because basically he's one of the. Not only is he one of the Patreons, but also like put money towards the art of his character, and we added it to the lore of the story because it expanded so much and so well. And it fitted and mingled so well that eventually, for his character, not only did I help him build more of a backstory towards the actual canon, but also we created more of an actual sort of fitting around it, including 2 other siblings, Because I always wanted, after I realised that Tempest was going to have children, I always wanted it that there was one for each different branch of the timelines that he could affect. But also then we added the fact that Legion has so much more lore and backstory with them. And, yeah, so he was a player, and he played as Legion for a long time, and he was someone who can manipulate factors of the past, so he can, like, rewind time on objects or on people, see into the past, he could stop time, he was downright ridiculously quick. And he could even access and go back to the past, but whenever he'd go to the past, if he affected anything in the past, he'd then eventually be sent back to the present, because technically he'd then splinter a new reality, and therefore he couldn't live or exist in that reality. But, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd consider him an angel, personally, but at the same time, potentially he could also be a god of his own right, as, like, you know, god of the past, under the domain of the god of time itself. But I don't know, I feel like that's kind of coming to the end of it. I mean, unless if you guys have any other ones to specifically add to this.
I was debating bringing up the idea, like, considering we kept mentioning Superman, someone who could actually be considered a god, Darkseid. But maybe that's for a different time.
Actually, no, you actually bring up a good point. Darkseid actually is an extra-dimensional being that is too powerful for the universe that everyone else exists on. So he creates avatars that he controls in the universe of you know, in the universe that he's always fighting in. Because they state that if he ever were to try and bring his own full body into the universe that he's in, because he's basically in another dimension, he's actually so powerful and so big, he just burn up the entire universe because he's too powerful and too big. So he creates little avatars for himself that harness quite a lot of his power, but not all of it. I don't know, I that's kind of that plus something else I can't really remember created the inspiration. Not Dormammu, but something else created the inspiration for how I designed the gods, the physical realm, the metaverse, and the Omegaverse, where it's technically it's planes of existence that are above each other that are just infinitely bigger than each other by each different set in space.
It's not that weird kid's toy, is it, with the wee donut you throw in a hoop? The wee hoop you throw in a wee stick, is it?
No. Although, no, it's not. I don't think it is. No, it's
the ones that generally gets like thinner the higher you go up, so it looks like a pyramid, but you did it the inverse way.
Oh man, you've just broke my entire reality. I'm just like questioning everything now.
Thank you, kids' toys of the 90s or 1890s.
Or 1890s. Any last?
I'm pretty sure it was back then.
I don't. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe the
Only
next one.
1890s kids will remember this.
Only 1890s kids. Man, they'd be 130 by now. So
damn, they old.
I actually have something interesting to say before we finish this, but I kind of want to ask you guys the last question, which is, it seems as though we're kind of wrapping up now, because we're now starting to go, instead of just the subject, we're now going on to Animite Tales itself, and not necessarily saying that, like, oh, we need to sort of step off, but that's usually the end point I would usually say, like, you know, once we've talked about the subject quite a bit, we then move on to Animite Tales and RPGs in general, like D&D and stuff. I'd say the only thing that I would say to add to this, because I know, for instance, if Alfie is listening, he would be very much asking me to talk about the older gods, or the old gods from Call of Cthulhu, where in Call of Cthulhu,
great old ones?
The great old ones, that's it, yes. Like cosmic entities of such ridiculous raw power that we can't even conceive it. Like, instead of like the anime or the superpower or the you know, the Western style thing of like, I have power but you don't understand it, or oh man, this guy has so much raw destructive ability. it's like, no, we're not even going to talk about the feats. They just are of such power that even thinking about it would drive you mad. And I mean, just to end it on that.
Yeah, it's the whole like they don't apply. None of our rules apply to them, so we're trying. Like, our brain cannot comprehend it. So like, wait, no, if they can't, the rules. No, and it's just sort of like your brain bends in on it.
Why do I smell copper?
You just become like, opening the Ark of the Covenant in Indiana Jones, and your face just melts off completely and you're dust.
I mean, that actually does happen in Call of Cthulhu. Some of the different creatures can actually do that to you if you look at them.
Yes.
And that's exactly it. The difference between the gods in D&D and the gods in Untitled Tales and the gods in this, in Call of Cthulhu, the gods in D&D and the gods in Animal Tales are like, they are beings above our power and above our comprehension. And then there's the old new gods, or the old... Is it the old new gods, or is it just the old...
It's the old ones,
the great old ones.
They're essentially so incomprehensible that even trying to comprehend them in our reality is incomprehensible. So therefore, your mind, you actually lose sanity just by viewing them and trying to comprehend them. You therefore break reality.
Just by looking at them turns you insane. In fact, there's even one that I think if you look at it, it pierces you in the eyes, and so many people are like, "Oh my gosh, that's horrible." I think in one of the laws you actually find out it does this so that then you die. Because it pierces you through the eyes, either to blind you so that you never see anything that incomprehensible again, so that you no longer lose sanity, because it's like your mind just clicks back and it goes, oh yeah, the reason as to why it's so powerful is I just lost my eyesight, and then you sort of kind of gain a little bit of sanity back. Or it actually just kills you that way by piercing its power through your eyes into your brain and killing you instantly, so that it just gives you a mercy killing, basically. It's like, I'm so sorry. It kind of yells you because you're like.
I like the thing that it does the noise in like the Three Stooges, like.
I kind of like that it just sort of almost goes, oh no, and then just sort of like cries as it puts you down. But obviously we conceive it as it just going, just floating away.
Scariest ones are like, I think this was done in a Neil Gaiman comic once, where the humans just do it themselves. Like they just get some scissors and it's like cut out their eyeballs manually and go, oh, that's better.
I mean, it depends on what monster you're summoning. Sometimes that is the preferred option, as opposed to because there are monsters, if I'm correct. Like there's one that's I can't remember what it's called, but essentially the essence of chaos. And it's like pretty much it just is in its own realm and has gods dancing mindlessly around it.
I mean, there is
and if you even look at it, you instantly I think it's like a D100 sanity roll.
Jeez.
And if you fail, like the maximum sanity you can get is 100, but most likely it's in the 50s, probably less so if you're going against this thing.
Damn.
So you have essentially you're going so cuckoo bananas that you will instantly poo your pants and then just put it on your head and begin singing and dancing mindlessly while shooting in the air, saying yippee-ki-yay.
I mean, that actually sounds
in the 20s.
Like, that actually sounds like pretty sane, to be fair, in the terms of insanity. I mean, one of the worst ones is literally just brain mush. I mean, I was actually going to say the last thing that I was actually going to say. I completely forgot about this. In Supernatural, sorry for everyone who's heard me talking about this before, they actually try to summon what they think is a very powerful demon. They realize it's an angel. The woman tries to find out what it is. The angel doesn't have a physical form yet, and so she sees the physical form, or the true form, of the angel, and it burns her eyes clean out of her head.
Jeez.
And that is not even the most powerful angel there. And I'm not going to talk about power levels and power creep and power feats, but the concept of that is probably weirdly the most purest way of thinking of how ridiculously powerful some of these beings are, that we can't comprehend them, but our physical forms might not ever be able to manifest them, because looking upon them could kill us.
To add to that, I was going to mention the great Kevin Smith movie Dogma.
Oh, right. Kevin Smith.
Have you seen that?
No.
Oh, it is.
I love
If you
Kevin
want
Smith. I
to
want to point this out.
If you want a film that delves deeply into Christian mythology, while also being both decent and not very much taking the piss out of it, but legitimately pulling it off quite well, I recommend it.
I've just
It
realised
has
that
a lot. It has a lot of more set playing God, by the way. Near the end.
I might have just messed up by confusing Kevin Smith with Kevin Hart. I love Kevin Hart.
No, oh no,
No.
So cursed.
So cursed.
Kevin Smith, and the idea. I'm pretty sure this is. I'm not sure if this is legitimately true, but it sounds true to me. Is that God cannot actually speak to mortals because their voice is so powerful that it instantly, essentially, causes their head to explode from just their. So they actually have to use an angel to talk to people. That's why I have like angels to be the voice of God.
They actually do again.
Played by the great late.
Morissette just boops the main character on the nose. You know, that's
Yeah.
like. It's just anyone speaking.
Okay,
God.
speaking of booping on the nose, can we just take appreciation for one last anime?
No.
Sam, you'll love this one. Soul Eater, Azura
Really?
is resurrected, and Black Star, who is conceivably probably one of the most OP characters, he runs in and goes, "I'm going to be the one who eventually kills God," and fights Azura, and all he does is tap him on the head. And his entire face is rippled, and then his entire body is just blasted back by a pure shockwave of the ungodly power that this demon god has. And then afterwards, he's like trying to readjust his skin. He like pulls it all the way back like an elastic bungee and flicks it at Death's son. It hits him in the head, and it creates like a little eye-shaped bruise, and it just instantly KOs him. Just oh.
Are you saying Azura is just Kevin Bacon from X-Men first?
I mean,
first squad?
Kevin Bacon takes his power from Azura because I mean, clearly Azura was first. 2000, I think 2008.
I don't know. I mean, pretty sure Kevin Bacon's character came before.
I will not allow it. I will not allow it.
Stop, family police.
But yeah, no.
Yes.
So that's pretty much the end of the subject. So I was actually going to ask the two of you: do you guys have any more subjects for next week, or do you want to just leave it up to me this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe we should talk more about specific powers, like our favorite ones and stuff, like the olden days we had, just for lack of lack of other subjects that I can think about.
I mean, I once we've gotten up to this point, I actually do like the idea of going back to the basics again. Not necessarily going back to the ones that we've already done, but I mean, going back to the more minuscule powers, or at least powers that interest us. What about you, Sam?
I don't know why I was thinking discussing legacy characters. As in like the idea of like there's like say a name of a superhero, but many people over the years take over from the title, essentially like Spider-Man.
Yeah, like Spider-Man, yeah.
Or heck, even the Human Torch. Originally the Human Torch was an android, and then Johnny Storm took over that title whenever he became the Human Torch. Spider-Man, The Flash.
It's literally passing the torch.
Legacy
Exactly.
characters. I think I know how we could do it. We could actually state legacy characters in fiction, and how they can also be represented in tabletop RPGs. So we go back, we go away from this. A week later, we have to come up with exactly how a legacy character can be done, or has been done before. Cool dibs on the Soul Family. To specifically figure out exactly how well a character could be done as a legacy character, like taking on the previous incarnation of them. Like as you said, Barry Allen, Wally West, Bart Allen, Miles Morales. Yes, exactly. Spider-Man.
Terry, the guy who played Batman Beyond.
Yes.
Terry McGinnis.
Yes, Terry McGinnis.
Dick Grayson.
Also, we can also talk about this. Another part of it is also the factor of actors, because obviously an actor has to then take on from the next one after them, or in the terms of imports, dubbing, not necessarily just anime in the terms of anime to then, you know, being subbed and then dubbed, but also in the terms of like when a Western company creates something, they then obviously port it out and then they then get dubbed by other countries. So we're not just talking about Japanese to Western, or at least Eastern to Western. We're talking about Eastern to Western as well, rather than just Western to Eastern to Western. We're also talking about Western to Eastern. I just realised that I said the same thing twice. But you know what I mean, like literally legacies in fiction in general. But yeah, we could touch on that a little bit. Yeah, but yeah, legacy heroes or legacy characters.
Yeah, because even as Alex brought up ones I didn't even consider, there are like even kings and queens that usually are legacies, because the Tudors.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Then came Elizabeth I, who had the legacy of I don't think I won't mention that. You know, various other things that happened in those eras.
Well, and we could talk about more in games and fiction, but yes, specifically going towards powers, heroes, villains, anything like that. So, legacy.
I forgot even villains have legacies, like Mysterio.
Legacy characters.
Like 5 Mysterios.
We could talk about legacy characters, and how they can fit in tabletop RPGs. Because then at least we can then go, at the beginning we could go, here's all of this, and then we then go on to then mechanically speaking, or even as a role play game, how would you do this in this meaning? Like, Alex, how would you have a legacy character, either as your DM allowing a player, or as a player hoping that your DM would allow it? And the same with you, Sam. And then obviously I'll just, talk about the Soul and Uccello family as much as I can, because, I'm a massive fanboy of Tier 4 players' characters.
Because it's characters, not just heroes, you've got villains as well. Like, we're going to have to say
10. Thank you, Alex. Right, okay, so I'm calling dibs on those dudes. As a DM who has never been able to play, because I am the forever DM, sad face. But, I guess, yes, stay tuned in for that, and thanks again, Alex, and thank you again, Sam, for joining me on this wonderful podcast. In all honesty, this has gone over way longer than I had imagined, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah. It was a subject matter which I find deeply interesting.
And who knows, maybe there might be a part 2. Unless if everyone finds it interesting, but if people don't find it interesting, then we probably won't touch it again.
Connor, next time you see me, come watch me and tell me if you find this interesting or not.
Come find me, bruh. So either way, every single person who is listening to this or watching this, thank you ever so much. You are very well appreciated. Spread the words about the Patreon. Again, the Betarians Patreon. We'll post it on Facebook, because we actually do have an Animite Tales and also a Betarians Facebook account. We also have our Betarians YouTube channel, and obviously you can just have a look on the Mystical Joe.
Joey the Mystic.
Joey the Mystic, yes. Check out my channel on Twitch, which we're currently streaming on right now, Joey the Mystic, so that you can actually stay tuned and see exactly what we're doing. If you're interested in having a look, or even adding any comments, or posting something in the chat whilst we're streaming, obviously you're more than welcome to do so, and maybe we might even hear on what you have for the next episode after legacy characters and how they could be played, or how they can be done in tabletop RPGs. Thank you again for joining us, and hopefully you'll hear from us again next week. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Bye.
I will see you in the future.
Ciao, ciao, for now.